Okay. Hello, and thank you for welcoming me into your space today. I am Dr. Monica Addison Walker, and we will be looking at how to incorporate two mindful practices into self-care. We're going to be focusing on our personal strengths and guided imagery. What I want to be mindful of right now is to make sure that you have the survey results that you had completed prior to this presentation. Please have some way to go back and be able to pull that up for your reference. Whether it was printing it out ahead of time or just making some personal notes for yourself so that you'll be able to go back and forth for that. And any way that's most comfortable for you to take notes as we're going on, because something might just jog your memory. Try to be comfortable. I know it's very hard when you are in your personal space and you're in households with a lot of other people, etc., but it's hard to find a quiet place. It's not necessarily important right now, but as we go into the presentation, you're going to want to be able to get comfortable. Okay, go back. I also would like you to make sure that you have any kind of method that you would like to use to get your thoughts down. One would be to use sticky notes if you do not have, you weren't able to do stones ahead of time. This is what I considered a medium-sized stone. And then this size is the smaller stones. The next portion I want you to look at is the objectives for today. Just use those in your own leisure time. That would be great for you to just know what we're going to be using. Okay. I'd like to talk a little bit about what balance looks like. Okay. I love this picture because I like the idea of stacking stones and trying to figure out whether or not we're really feeling overloaded or whether we're balanced. And usually when we're looking at stacking stones, it looks like it's completely balanced. Okay, but is it really? And I want you to observe how it's the bottom has a lot of weight bearing down on it. And if you notice, the bottom stone has to be able to provide a really strong foundation as we're going along. And just in general, as school psychologists, we really struggle with balancing our training and work demands within our school building and then also our personal demands. It's just an incredible amount of balance. And if we also look at all of our responsibilities, each stone would be a responsibility on top of our foundation stone. And so all of our demands affect our foundations. And then on the mental health side, we go to staff. We are the go-to person for staff meetings, and for staff and support, and even within our own colleagues, we are the go-to person. We a lot of times are confidants for a lot of different people. So we're privy to a lot of confidential material, and all of these factors affect our ability to function efficiently and to affect our ability to balance our responsibilities in the workplace. Okay. But right now, we're not in a natural workplace. Okay, so we have to also figure out how we're going to balance our home responsibilities and our work. And that's really a big issue for many of us. So I want you to stop and think that when we're not about 80 to 100% balance, we can become very overwhelmed and overloaded. And I want you to look back at the stacking stones. one stone can lean a little bit off center and not cause the entire structure to fall down. However, if you have any kind of significant movement, it will topple, right? So overloading lets us remember that that's not balanced, okay? And it can lead to burnout and illness and health concerns and stress and dissatisfaction with our job, right? Okay, so we're going to look on at some of the evidence-based research that, excuse me, that has come up over the years about why it's so important for us to balance. Let's click on to the next slide. So I can say that the whole concept of self-care and mindful practices, etc., they pretty much started popping up around the early 2000s. We've been really paying more attention to it in the field of psychology because of the work of Kabat-Zinn, and that was really coming into play in the early 2000s. We began to see a more expansive use of using mindfulness or meditative practices, or even the whole concept of self-care and the importance on well-being. And initially, clinical studies were looking at focusing on stress and recovery when we were looking at assisting people with cancer and anxiety and also depressive patients. We also know that mindfulness and meditative practices can help with the subcortical and the frontal lobe parts of our brain. So there's a lot of really good personal and neurological reasons on why this is so important for us. But I was amazed that about only 8 to 10 years ago, we began to recognize that graduate students needed to learn more about self-care before they got into employment. Okay, like go figure, like why did they not even realize that? So I can only imagine that how many of us actually heard our academic institutions touting self-care? Okay, because I know that until I got into a doctoral program, nobody even cared about self-care. It was just like you kind of were a slave driver for everything, right? So when I was attending a clinical program at Loyola, Jeffrey Barnett, who was the chairperson for the Maryland Ethics Board, he began to notice that most violations that were being brought to the board by psychologists in general had to do with psychologists being overwhelmed. Okay, so basically, because they were overwhelmed, they really were not effectively making the best judgment calls. And these were really ethical violations. So he started doing research while I was there, and then a lot of the research came in afterwards. And what he basically said was that self-care is not an indulgence, okay? And it's necessary because those feelings and the lack of balance in our lives will make us take notice a whole lot sooner than later. Okay. So we're going to look at what self-care means. Okay, we'll move on from there. So I now want you to think about what are the aspects of self-care itself. I'm going to progress that slide. So part of self-care is looking inside ourselves. It's completely an introspective exercise. Self-care for one person does not look the same for the next person. The idea behind this slide is that we want to reduce our negative feelings and our stressors so that we're really open to nourish ourselves. Okay. So when we become to feel more present, if we become a little bit more in the moment, we can gain more meaning in life, gratitude, and value in what we do. And one of the most common complaints about self-care is time. Okay. Most people think that we need time for self-care, and they also think that money is involved. But there is a huge industry that tells us that tropical vacations and spa days and retreats and long meditation practices are self-care. Yeah, that's nice, and that could be part of it depending on the person, but they actually aren't directly part of self-care. So what I have now is a TED Talk by Susanna Winters about self-care. I like this because she talks a little bit about her journey on what she needed to do as a person to actually start acknowledging what self-care was and why it would affect the job she does. Okay, so let's just see if we can take a look at that. It's about 9 minutes, so just get yourself a little bit more relaxed. Okay, so what we're going to do is I want you to now go into Schoology and watch the video, the TED Talk that we have prepared during this time. And then when you're completed that, you're able to come back into the next slide. Okay, so wow. Just as I was mentioning previously, self-care is very simple, okay? Ms. Winters mentioned that in order to take care of others, she needed to take care of herself first. She needed to become grounded in what she was doing, okay? So I want you to think for a moment, because have you ever taken a plane ride? And do you remember at the beginning of the flight attendants go over all of the safety protocols, and they tell you that in the event of an emergency, you're supposed to place the mask on yourself before you place it on a child? Okay, I want you to think about that. If you pass out, how can you help a child, right? If you're stressed out, overwhelmed, and anxious, how can you do your job as a school psychologist? Well, you can, but not as effectively, right? So there's always more to this picture, okay? She had talked about, you know, taking control over what you put into your body, what you eat, making sure you get activity, what's going on in your head, okay? Pausing and becoming quiet, okay? That's all self-care. It's multifaceted, but it's very, very simple. So, like I said, there's more to this picture, and we need to focus on ourselves. But one of the problems is that when we start going in, we become a little bit more introspective. Our thoughts start to get in the way. Okay? We have so many things going on in our head at any given time that when we pause and we become quiet, we start getting overwhelmed by those thoughts that go swimming around. So if we look at numbers 2, 3, and 4 on the right-hand side of the slide, those will add to the reasons why we shy away from examining ourselves too closely. Okay, so there's some overwhelming feelings that can go along with becoming a little bit more introspective. Okay, so it's simple and it's complex at the same time, because focusing in on yourself sometimes can be a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, so let's look more. Let's look at our character strengths and our excuse me, and the survey that we had used. I want to now look a little bit closer to who we are as individuals. And what I did was I separated and created some domains. Okay. I decided, just for a little bit of ease, I created a work and a personal domain. When we think about our strengths at work, these are some pretty consistent ones. You may come up with more on your personal side, which is why it's kind of jumbled over there. But in contrast, if I were to ask you what your strengths were, and how you thought about yourself, we would see sometimes some drastic differences between how we see ourselves on our personal side and how we see our strengths on our work side. But when we do that, that can also create some balances or some shifts in our balance. Okay, so I want you to think back to that stacking stone image that I had all the way at the beginning of the presentation. Even having dualities and how you see yourself can create imbalance. And that's when self-care becomes really important. So I'm going to really challenge you and ask, do you drop your personal strengths or your work strengths when you're moving from one domain to the next? Okay, yeah, of course not. We really don't drop it, okay? But what we tend to do is we tend to kind of ignore them. Like sometimes some of the things that we do at work, we don't use those strengths that we have at work. We don't necessarily bring them home. And the same thing, the things that we do in our personal realm, we don't really use those strengths in our workplace. So as a result, those strengths that we have, they can become really weak, they can become neglected, they can become ignored, or they can become undeveloped, okay? But the whole thing is that what we're doing is we're leaving chunks of ourselves behind, okay? And if you think of your strengths as being your greatest resources, okay? They are your greatest resources. And what you're doing is you're not having them at your available to you at all times, just by choice of not presenting them there. So I'm going to say, no wonder we struggle with balance. Okay, we don't pull all of our strengths to assist us in taking care of us. So we're now going to look more at the survey that you completed. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that survey. Okay, so we'll go forward again. And I want you to pull your surveys from viacharacter.org. One of the reasons that it appears that some people manage self-care better than others is because, one, they take time for introspection, they know their limits, they also set limits, and then they also know their strength. What I like about this survey is that, it's a set for adults, it's a set for children, and these are common strengths that they found that everyone has. Okay, people have a whole lot of other strengths, but these were just the main 24 character strengths that they found that people across the world had. Okay, so this is the idea, is that you have these strengths in whatever shape or form, and they're available to you. Okay, so that's what we're going to focus on. I like to use this survey because it uses data. And so we can learn more about ourselves by using data itself. Plus, psychologists love data, and it allows us to continue speaking in the same language. So we work with data all day long. So this is a way to use data work really well for you. And also would help you know whether or not you're actually improving in your strengths and in your self-care. So the signature strengths are your most positive capacities and what most people would see about you. So when you look at your survey, those signature strengths that are on the top of your survey are basically your image that people see. Okay, so they're going to give you your top 5. Okay, and then all the way at the bottom of the chart is your lesser strengths. Okay, they're not weaknesses. They're just ones that you don't use that often. Okay, and what it means is that you will use a fair amount of your energy to actually use those strengths because they're not as developed. Okay, and if you were called to use those lesser strengths, it would be very draining for you. Okay, so can you imagine what it would be like if you were asked as a school psychologist to use those less developed areas all the time? Okay, people were expecting those to be strengths for you just because you're the school psychologist, but all of a sudden, nope, you can't use it. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to do a little activity. Okay, and in this activity, you're going to need either your Post-it notes or the stones that you gathered and your little Sharpie marker to write on those stones. Okay, and we're going to focus on the 4 strengths that you had identified from your survey. So let's look at that activity that we're going to be completing on the next slide. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to use our signature strengths to boost our lesser strengths. Okay, now the middle strengths that are listed in your survey, those help balance your signature strengths. So the whole idea is that the strengths that are listed in your survey that are on in the middle, they help support your signature strengths, the ones that everyone sees. Okay, and remember, there's your lesser strengths all the way at the bottom. Okay, so we can use our strengths to explore how we should shape our self-care. Okay, for example, my signature strengths are pretty self-reflective, of course, that's given what I do a lot of. So it's spirituality, perspective, and hope, leadership, and prudence. Those were my 5 signature strengths. Okay, now that let me know that when I'm planning self-care for myself, I'm less likely to involve other people because my strength of prudence test my ability to cooperate and focus on others rather than myself. Okay, so the idea of self-care is to focus on yourself, but prudence tells me, oh no, Monica, you like to assist other people, and I'm very intuitive with other people and how they're thinking and how they're feeling. Okay, so I tend to not try to use self-care that would involve other people. I do keep it pretty introspective. Okay, and then also I may not attempt to look for activities that are very daring, like skydiving as part of self-care, because bravery was a lesser strength for me. Okay, I'm brave, but I'm not that brave. Okay, I may be curious about something, but I'm not necessarily willing to take that leap after a lot of problem solving that goes into it. So the idea is that self-care should not be stressful. And if you engage in it and you're tired afterwards, or you didn't engage in self-care then, because self-care should not be draining. Okay, that's one of the problems with vacations for many people. They associate going on vacation as self-care, but suppose that vacation didn't match your character traits or your strengths. Okay, then it really wasn't a self-care thing. That was just an activity that you did. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be putting, if you haven't already, your top 3 strengths. Okay, you can pick whatever 3 you want of your signature strengths and write them either on 3 Post-it notes or put them on the 3 stones, the 3 smaller stones. Okay, and then you're going to take one of your lesser strengths, one of the lower ones, and put it on that larger stone. Okay, and then arrange the stones in front of you just so that you have them close by. Okay, and like I said, you can use index cards or Post-it notes for yourself as you're doing that. Okay. You don't have to pick the first three or the one that's all the way on the bottom. Just pick whatever you want. Just pick your signature strength and then also pick a lesser strength. Okay. You're just going to pick what you like the most. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use a guided practice to assist us on focusing on those strengths. Okay, and you're going to be placing those in front of you. You can put them in your hand if you want to. Just get yourself into a mood because we're going to do a guided practice, which is something very, very easy we can do as part of self-care. But we're going to use our talismans, our stones, as a way to help focusing on ourselves, okay, as we go through this guided practice. So what I want you to do is I just want you to get comfortable for the next 5 to 8 minutes. And we're going to progress the slide so that we can have just a visual initially. Hold your signature strengths close by or in your hand. Be aware that you are in the space you are in. But I also would like you to just picture yourself away from where you are in this moment, placing yourself on a bench, looking out across the clear waters. Use this time to take a deep breath in through your nose and blow it out calmly. Hold the image of water and calm in your mind, and if you're comfortable and able, close your eyes. Slowly become aware of your body, your feet. Our feet are usually our foundation. They are that bottom stone in our stacking stones. Notice how you're feeling as you move from your feet up to your calves, up to your thighs, if you have a stone or you have your strengths, place them close into your middle. How is your middle feeling? One more cleansing breath in and out. Imagine yourself looking out into the water and hovering over the water is your lesser strength. It's out there waiting for you to be part of you. Closer to the shoreline are 3 boulders acting as breakers along the shoreline. These 3 large rocks or boulders each are your 3 signature strengths. They're there, close to you. And slowly, as you glance at one of your signature strengths, it leads you to think how you can bring that lesser strength closer into your reach. The power of that strength is joined by its second and third strength, gently guiding that weaker strength closer to you. Imagine those strengths gently placing warmth and nurturing around that lesser strength, sort of in a manner that a mother or father would hug a child, bringing it back into safety, providing tools and guidance. And as you sit in the warmth, feeling the warmth and the calm, notice how relaxed the mind becomes, knowing that you're only focusing on you. Things that are important to you. As you sit along, remember how that lesser strength was just hovering and floating effortlessly across that water. What do you need to feel light? Take a moment and think about what brings you joy, what feelings you have, what thoughts go through your mind when you are experiencing that joy. Continue to breathe in and out steadily. Let your strengths guide you into exploring you. Continue to imagine what compassion looks like as a strength. Continue to imagine what perseverance would look like as a strength. Continue to imagine what curiosity would look like, creativity, fairness, humility, love, humor, forgiveness, teamwork. Does your self-care have anything to do with zest? Zest for life, zest for living. When you do things that help you, do you have a love of learning? Is kindness or fairness guiding you? How can these strengths help take care of you? Continue to focus a little while longer on our breathing in and out, and calmness of knowing you and only you. And when you are able, come back to this space, move back to your bench, and join us back into the presentation. I'm going to give a moment for everybody to collect themselves. I'm hoping that that guided practice allowed you to feel comfortable, being able to look a little bit more at your strengths was insightful. And I hope that you were able to have less thoughts running through your head, if anything. Okay, I'm going to bring myself back in. Okay, and we're just going to look more at our last slide since we are ready to move on. So what I did was I listed some supports to assist us in becoming quiet and looking in. This is actually a zip file that goes a little bit more into the strengths. My contact information, that's if you want to have more discussion about it. The other thing that I will say is that when we look in, sometimes we pull up things that are uncomfortable, okay? And so being able to talk with people that you trust, whether it's other coworkers, family members, etc. But I also did include the Employee Assistance Center program through BCPS. We need to find ways to be able to connect with others. And then I also included 2 apps, both I'm very familiar with. I actively use Headspace only because Headspace is from the UK, and that has a fee for the full use of the program, but it's like $99 for the entire year, that sort of thing. I like Headspace because you can actually meditate or do mindful practices, but it's guided, sort of similar to what we have done, but also there's a lot of dead space so that you can just get quiet in your head and silence in your head. They go down to 5 minutes. So when you are working and you just need to calm down, or even if you're home and the kids get overwhelming or life gets overwhelming, you can just take 5 minutes and just go there. Calm will do the same thing. Okay, so those are just great references to use. As part of it too, my contact information is very important, because there are prizes, okay? The first 2 people who are willing to share their 4 strengths and how they're going to use them to create a self-care routine will receive a meditative journal or book. I have 2 to give away, and what you're going to need to provide me with is you can say something as simple as, hey, Dr. A.W., I have the signature strengths of spirituality, perspective, and hope. And my lesser strength was teamwork. So I'm going to participate in an online book club weekly that focuses on multicultural authors and social justice. Okay, so you're taking all your strengths and your interests and you're trying to build up what it is you want to do. Okay. So what you need to do is you need to identify also how you're going to be able to track this. Okay, we got to have some data here. I want to make sure you're going to progress through this in your self-care. So how you do it is you need to make sure that you have all your little ducks in a row so that you can actually get started with it. But also when I communicate with you, I will help you and say, hey, did you think about doing this, 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 this? Remember, self-care should not be stressful. It should be easy. It should be something that you can do on your own at any given time to assist your needs. Okay. So do you see now how when we take our strengths, the self-care becomes a little bit more meaningful to us and then we become refreshed? Okay. Well, I'm really hoping that you do find some of the tools that I provided for you today to help you as we move forward. The idea is to move forward, to help to build some resiliency in ourselves as we go on and we are working with others. So again, thank you for allowing me to come into your space today, and I wish everyone a great school year.